My pants. Ruined, and it's all your fault.
And how women saw themselves.
I've got to meet Tom on a big business deal.
Now, here we have, looks to me like the New Yorker. Stop moaning and get on with the story. Women, and especially women writers, have no use for destiny. They wouldn't compose a Hamlet if they could.
One of them said about Alice Munro, "Well, you might be a good short story writer, but I don't want to go to bed with you."
Women won the right to vote in 1929, but even by the 70s, women struggled to be taken seriously.
I want to tell you, you have beautiful eyes.
The male gaze was often directed below the neck.
It was a man's world. Women were not even meant to be interested in the news. You know, there were no women newsreaders.
I mean, I can remember we used to get very strange looks. Women didn't go into pubs and couldn't get a mortgage.
Whenever I got my tax return from the government, it always had a headline, "If you have a husband, this form is addressed to him." Can you believe that?
That's right.
Yes, I do.
Young women entering publishing were rarely given the power to make decisions.
A lot of publishing was like a gentleman's club. Your typical joiner was a highly educated woman with at least one degree from a top university and who was also willing to type.
The issue of women being silenced and being invisible was huge. We just weren't being heard because nobody was listening.
Women were writing in a man's world. Virago took women into their own world and their own perspective.
We were all learning, you know, to give ourselves the validity to realize that we could run companies, we could make decisions, we could demand equal pay.
And we lived with those sort of men, particularly, who would be amazed if you said, "Up yours." I always wanted to change the world. It simply wasn't good enough. You have to fight.
This is the story of how Virago changed the world, one page at a time.
There was nothing you could do, really, in my world of book publishing, except do publicity and marketing. And the reason they wanted you to do publicity is that they chose, if you were adequate looking, you'd be sent out to flirt with journalists and get coverage in newspapers. There was a particularly nauseating old man who used to put his hand on your rather plump thigh and stuff like that. Oh, nobody ever told you could run anything.
The media was aggressively male. There was a culture of alcoholism, of drink, of cigarettes, and indeed of exploiting women.
I'd go along to a sales conference. Well, any old man used to think he could get you into bed. It was like the wolves were on the loose.
By that time, say 1970, I was 32, and I'd had a good 8 years living in the working world, and that would turn anybody into a raving feminist in those days.
Girls, would you please turn? The proceedings have been temporarily suspended.
I am very, very happy to be here at this cattle market tonight. Moo.
People often ask me if we were influenced by American feminism and things like that, but I felt influenced by you two. And I think there was a sort of blast of can-doism going on, you know. We all felt we could do things. I felt I could do anything.
I need you more than birds in the sky.
We had no money to pay for publicity.
Oh, did I do it for free?
So you were, yes.
I definitely remember saying to you, I think what you're doing is so wonderful, I want to do it for books. And that's when I went to see John Booth and said, I want you to finance it. I went to one of the four men who ran Quartet, and I said, look, what I want to do is have my own publishing imprint, and I want it to be a feminist publishing imprint, publish women's writing so that they get more fair crack of the whip in every way.
My immediate reaction was that it was an interesting idea and absolutely timely, because women's lib, as it was called then, was very much a big issue.
Because the concept of life is a social concept. It presupposes a whole way of life that we haven't even discussed yet. What are you doing at a Women's Liberation Conference?
The whole thing was so exhausting because we were changing ourselves from inside out and the way with patterns of thought. But this is what feminism was doing then.
It was. We took that phrase, the personal is political, which was, for me, incredibly important because it was how you lived. Who did the shopping? Who did the cooking? I mean, did you have sexual rights and rights to say no? They were really big things.
I was a late comer to feminism. The stereotypes of femininity were firmly embedded in my head, I think. Passivity, conformity to some extent. That's me.
Yes.
I didn't have ambitions to have a career at all, not at all. What is that? What is that?
That's you, isn't it?
Yes, it is me.
On a demonstration.
And are you there, Sheila?
No, because
there am I
my
in the
photo-
corners.
This one is Marcia Rowe holding the spare rib banner.
And there were we.
Abortion.
That was the abortion march, isn't it? Yes. This is me and Lynn Siegel and
Yes.
Hermione Harris. I went to a women's movement meeting at Sheila Rowbottom's house. And I just thought it sounded interesting, and I went along. And it was a revelation. I think we're talking about work, women and work. And I just remembered this feeling of intensity in the room, and passion. And being a person who responded a lot to intensity and passion, I thought it was just great.
But actually, we did really find it interesting talking about things like Simone de Beauvoir and Engels.
We did.
But we were always worried.
And Havelock Ellis and
Because
Olive Schreiner.
we felt we are not a proper
I know.
consciousness
Well,
raising
we-
group.
we
because
weren't.
The theory of the consciousness raising group was that you were meant to bring your personal life into the group.
I remember some nights there were suddenly huge revelations. I remember a night talking about which of us had been raped or attempted rape, and I'd say of the 11 people there, or whatever it was, 7 of them had either been raped or had attempted rape.
When I started the company, it was called Spare Rib Books. And then I changed the title. And I had a whole row of thesauruses, you know, gods of the world, monsters of the world, kings of the world. And we didn't like any of the goddesses. Diana, you know. And you saw Virago.
And then we looked up its meaning.
Yes.
Fury, harpy, harridan, hussy, muckraker,
scold, she-devil,
termagant,
siren,
tigress,
spitfire,
vituperator,
witch,
winch.
An heroic woman.
Heroic, and also
Heroic.
the feeling that it was a slightly stroppy person.
Yes, stroppy,
We
heroic
loved that.
woman.
I love that. Seemed
Yeah.
to fit you down to a T.
What we had in common completely was our desire to give women the opportunity to write, express their thoughts, publish books, and more important, I think, to realize that they had a history of their own.
I think we were reluctant to just take on more work.
You had no time at all.
This was 74. There's an ad,
Oh, look at
first
that.
ad for Virago,
Was that the
announcing
very
that it will
first?
come out the next year.
Isn't that marvellous?
She was looking for someone. So we had lunch.
Ursula, she was the serious one and the one who had the academic contacts, the historians and the wonderful women who were writing and researching women's history at the time. I think she gave us feminist, what would you call it, credentials.
I started doing sort of freelance, unpaid work.
That's Smith Street, where I started Virago. That was the photograph of the 3 of us. There's Harriet, moi, and Ursula.
The first job I did was working for Carmen Khalil, who absolutely knew her worth.
I only knew publicity and marketing. I knew nothing about finance, cash flow, profit and loss, nothing. And I had to teach myself. And that was lovely. I loved doing that. I thought the bank manager would have a seizure when I asked him for an overdraft. And I had to get 2 men to guarantee the overdraft, 2 businessmen, which was easily done. I couldn't get it for myself.
Well, you can't start any car without the spark.
Carmen and I went to have tea at the Ritz with Bob Governors, and he agreed a £25,000 guarantee. So not money, but a guarantee.
That's what they sent you to school and university for. Flutter your eyelashes. Would you mind guaranteeing my overdraft at Barclays Bank so I can bring down the world?
Did you ever put any of your own money in?
Yes, yes, yes. What we all did is to put our houses, insane really, our mortgages on the line. That was insane. I had a 2-year-old child. That was what the flat looked like. This is the room. In the evenings, we would sit around and drink red wine and read things. So, you know, we started reading manuscripts, and Carmen had already started commissioning manuscripts. I don't know why people were always taking the cats. The very first book was Fen Women. It's an oral history of the women who lived in this particular Cambridgeshire village in the Fens. The pressure for village girls to marry is strong. They marry young, and many have families by the time they are 20. But although the dream of married bliss may fade rapidly, with his night out with the boys and her fourth-hand washing machine, divorce in the village is unheard of. Child-rearing, the great unacknowledged profession, is entirely her responsibility.
One of the stories, one of the many that I recorded, of a woman who had 9 children, who had nothing to eat, absolutely nothing to give them. Nothing. The news of the world.
Find any kind of sympathy with.
By 1976, I thought we needed an office.
They were in Soho, land of strip clubs. So you went up the stairs, lump, 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 and on the bottom there was a massage parlor. So as you went up the stairs, you were sort of eyed because people, of course, would think, what are all those women going up the stairs for?
It certainly wasn't as bright and white, was it?
No,
Or
was
clean.
really dingy.
And much bigger. We just had one big room, and all of us worked in it together, with me being a tyrant.
Carmen, Ursula and myself were there. Alexandra Pringle joined. And Lenny wonderfully wrote saying, would come like any help with publicity.
I was given the grand title of publicity manager, which frankly meant typing labels.
I think you sat here.
Well, you sat
I had 2 different times.
And Carmen sat there, did she?
Over there, in the sort of jacuzzi.
They had 3 typewriters, and it was crazy, really.
Noise.
So quick on those electric typewriters.
And
I think quicker than on anything I've ever done since.
It was incredibly orderly, very hardworking.
I did have a motor car, a terrible old banger, and I'd go around and delivering everything by hand to people to save the post. Oh, stay up all night and do it, you know?
You've got to get the light bulbs, blue paper, then go and sign up an author.
We didn't earn a lot of money. We didn't pay each other much for years. And everybody had to work extraordinarily long hours. And some of them had children. It was difficult.
What was Carmen like to work for?
She's famously pictured as being difficult to work for. She was not easy. That is true.
You say, what the fuck are you doing, you idiot? And in England, they would say, this is an absolute nightmare that I said this to her. You said that to a young woman who worked for you. And I would say, why is she inferior to me because she's working for me? She can tell me to fuck off.
Do you remember you used to often go and dictate your letters in the lavatory?
Yes.
And I used to go in and you'd be sitting there dictating
And we had some
away.
poor woman, didn't we?
And yeah, remember once you did it on the roof and the gust of wind took your correspondence away and you said, Alexandra, get up here! And I had this really tight skirt and I had to climb out and I was dashing around these rooftops picking up your correspondence.
Carmen was the managing director and she wanted things to be pretty much her way, and sometimes there were arguments about it and tensions about it.
I have heard some stories of people crying in the toilets.
Crying in the toilets. I cried in the toilets too. I mean, everybody dished it out. And I think my personality was very, very tyrannical when it came to making sure the company survived and that the authors and books were served properly and to get their work out there.
What I think was miraculous about the Virago Modern Classics is that until they came along, we women who read, we didn't understand our own history, our own fictional history. We might have known Virginia Woolf and Jane Austen and George Eliot and the Brontes and so on, but there were a lot of gaps in between those.
I started the classics list because somebody gave me Frost in May. And when I read it, it was the story of my life in the convent. It's about a little girl who writes a vivid novel and the nuns come across it and they think it's full of sin and she's expelled from school and she's destroyed for life by this. This is when the Mother Superior comes in, the Mother Superior dressed in black with her wimple. I told you once before that every will must be broken completely. Nanda glanced at the nun's face.
Elizabeth Taylor. Your mother, in her lifetime, was admired by many writers, and Kingsley Amis said she was one of the best English novelists born this century. Do you feel that she was as recognised then as she is today?
No, I don't think she was, and I think she'd be astonished. Thanks to Virago, who've published everything and kept her on the shelves in all the bookshops, and I think as the family, we owe a huge debt to Virago, but I think she would have been thrilled.
You just need to put these books into people's hands. You need to make them look, you need to make them look fresh again and like something that a contemporary audience would enjoy and would relate to.
We've all had that thing, people saying, you go to parties and you say you worked at Virago and people say you don't look like a feminist.
Virago, yes.
And you're not wearing dungarees.
Yeah. Everybody thought she'd gone to Virago, she's got short hair, oh, she's become a lesbian.
I remember reading a newspaper, and possibly even The Guardian, and said, we've got so-and-so, and they said, oh, we had a woman last week. In the feature. We featured a woman last week.
I think when you want to change the status quo in England, you've got enemies, really, haven't you? But one is definitely the British press.
I love Kate O'Brien. It's good to hear that.
Anthony Burgess really dominated The Observer. When he wrote a review of one of our books, it was Dorothy Richards' Pilgrimage, and he said, this is an astonishing, it's so wonderful that it's back in print. It sort of predates Joyce for Stream of Consciousness. Too bad it had to be published by those sows.
Leonora Carrington was the one that Alexandra loved.
By no stretch of usage can Virago be made not to signify a shrew, a scold, an ill-tempered woman, unless we go back to the etymology, a manlike maiden.
She's wonderful, I compliment.
It is an unlovely and aggressive name, even for a militant feminist organisation. And it presides awkwardly over the reissue of a great roman fleuve, which is too important to be associated with chauvinist sows.
I think it's because they thought of feminists as a race apart. And I think that was one of the biggest problems, really.
What kind of response were you getting from readers?
Oh my God, amazing. Bag loads. Letters from teachers saying, I really want to talk about feminism in the class. I want to change the curriculum. I would like more women on the thing. Please send me posters. You get women's groups from the WI right through to radical feminist groups who wanted a speaker to come.
It opened so many doors for readers. People would go into bookshops and ask for the next Virago book.
Virago wanted to be mainstream. You know, we were always set up not to be niche, to be on the high street. This was Carmen's ideas, and Ursula's too, but I've really stayed with that we represent 53% of the population. We want everyone to read our books, you know, and we might publish from the margins, but we are not marginal. That wasn't always popular in the kind of more radical ends of feminism in the 70s and 80s.
To read her.
Have you not read this book?
No, I haven't. No, one of the best Virago writers ever, I'm told.
There wasn't one feminism. There were many, many feminisms.
The women's movement in the 70s, I think, was dominated by white, middle-class, mostly heterosexual women. And there were quite a lot of women who started to resent that, I think, and felt that their interests as black women or working-class women or lesbians, you know, were not being represented. And so they wanted to have, and they did have, their own groups. I think there'd been a very romantic view earlier on about sisterhood, that somehow we could all work together, we were all women, and we were united by that. But then in 78, at what turned out to be the last conference, there was a lot of booing and shouting. And there was that recognition that it no longer became tenable to really keep a kind of national, collective organisation together.
There always were different views of feminism from day one. We commissioned a book which never got written called Feminisms because, you know, people often don't understand. There are just so many different forms.
Ursula was very much connected with what I called the North London socialist lot of feminists. And a lot of them were academics, and they'd done a lot of research already, and so we did some wonderful history reprints.
The non-fiction books that Ursula was doing were trailblazing. I always remember the one about Asian women in Britain, and because I'd had that room in Whitechapel and I had seen these, you know, the Bangladeshi women in their sweatshops and been very concerned by them. And this amazing woman called Amrit Wilson wrote this book called Finding a Voice. It caused a sensation, and the author got death threats from men in her community. It was really sort of breaking open what was, you know, what was behind closed doors.
Right at that moment, in the early 80s, was when the backlash against various liberal ideas started to kick in. And people were saying that they wanted to get women back into their homes and into a traditional, quotes, lifestyle.
One should really think of one's family and one's children first, one's husband and children. And, you know, this seems to be a very uncontemporary view to hold.
The spectacles women used to make of themselves, oiling themselves like roast meat on a spit, and bare backs and shoulders on the street, in public, and legs, not even stockings on them. No wonder those things used to happen. Things, the word she used when whatever it stood for was too distasteful or filthy or horrible to pass her lips.
When I was reading in my 20s, Lady Oracle, The Edible Woman, and then Cat's Eye, and The Handmaid's Tale in particular, which I remember for me and my group of friends, you know, my women friends, and my men friends actually, was this absolutely kind of electrifying, sort of horrible dystopia.
People were saying, well, isn't this based on Muslims, etc.? And I would say, cast your view backwards just a bit, and you will find a situation in which Women couldn't own property if they were married. They didn't get the kids if there was divorce. There was a great debate about whether they should be allowed higher education because it might shrivel up their wombs. So all of this was going on right here, not so long ago.
One of the things I think you have to do when you're Virago is be alive to whatever the political issues of the time are. So we have to be a mirror to the world.
I'm such a huge fan.
Thank you.
I was coming out as a young lesbian in the 80s, and so entering that world of gay activism, really, joining groups, discovering the power of sort of community politics and grassroots politics. When I think of the 80s, I think of it as that was its strength, really. You know, it was a lot of grassroots work.
The two sort of movements that were working very strongly in the 70s and the 80s were the peace movement and the women's movement. And in fact, things like Greenham Common, we did books about Greenham Common, and we went off to Greenham Common, a lot of us, and circled the base. Very exciting. Over Our Dead Bodies was a book of essays put together by Dorothy Thompson. Over Our Dead Bodies, Women Against the Bomb.
What we decided to do, which was quite exciting, was to hire Westminster Hall and to have a huge meeting to celebrate the publication of the book. And I can't imagine that we did do it, but I think we got 2,000 people there.
We were very ambitious. I mean, I remain ambitious for our books too, but we felt so much part of the movements in the world, and so naturally, it felt totally natural that we would have a rally to publish this book. When I think about that, I think, really?
It's like Kleenex. I can't imagine how people survived without Kleenex before it was invented. I can't imagine how I survived without Virago before it was invented.
When I got there, the turnover was under £300,000, and 3 years later when I left, it was just about £1 million.
Carmen was moving to Chatto. She'd accepted the job as managing director, and she wanted to bring Virago with her.
The company became worth quite a lot of money, so it was a good time to sell it.
I said I wouldn't leave without Virago, and so Virago came with me, but it did cause ferocious row with Ursula.
Harriet and I didn't want to become part of Chatto's because we felt it was an independent company and that it should stay that way.
The small publisher was becoming a pretty impossible financial thing. The whole of publishing was changing. There was no way a small publishing house could do the sales, distribution, into the digital age, which was only a dream then. To survive, Virago had to join a bigger group.
That was a difficult year. We had lots of difficult battles.
Certainly recreated the convent.
Well, you feel you recreated the convent at Virago?
When I left, by 1982, I felt I had, yeah. Disapproval, mortal sins, venial sins.
It was poignant because there was an ending and there was a new beginning.
We did keep Virago a separate entity, and that was important.
Carmen continued on the board, and she continued working on the Virago Modern Classics, so I continued working with her.
Is the common thread in people who have managed to do something, whether it's artistic or creative, a force of personality to push something through? Carmen?
I just don't know. I think as I get older, I do think perhaps I do have a strong personality, so it may be that. But living with it is beginning to exhaust me. So that may be right, but I don't think when you're doing something, you think that you're successful or that you have a strong personality or anything, you just get on with it.
When we all began, we were secretaries or publicity girls, and by the 80s or 90s, we were all in very big jobs.
Ladies, gentlemen, young men, young women, I encourage you with all my heart to strive to be bigger, stronger, healthier. Dare. Thank you.
Ursula Owen heard about Maya Angelou and heard about I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, which had been published in America in 1969.
Wouldn't they be surprised when one day I woke out of my black, ugly dream and my real hair, which was long and blonde, would take the place of the kinky mass that Mama wouldn't let me straighten.
According to Maya, it was sent to a lot of publishing houses in the UK, and they all said, no, nobody in the UK is going to be interested in a young black woman growing up in ever, you know. And then off she went and wrote The Beauty Myth.
Nice when you're crouching down there. Yes, gosh, very aggressive. And there, yes.
There was just a lot of that kind of constant demeaning sexism. The newspapers were very misogynistic. There was no sexual harassment law protecting them, so their experiences at work were awful. And every week you would read an essay in a British newspaper declaring that feminism was dead.
And really, when you think about it, if you've got looks, I don't think there's anything silly in using them.
I was writing about anorexia and body image and images of beauty, which were kind of the problem that had no name for my generation of women of my demographic. Success, publicity, tour around the world. I mean, I was very fortunate, and I'd been very well prepared, you know, and Virago was a big part of that. I was immediately cast in the role of, you know, baby feminist spokeswoman. You did something that the cultural gatekeepers said wasn't possible at the time. I remember the buzzword in magazines and periodicals in the 80s is feminism is dead, no one's interested. And you were creating a business model where showing that there was a market for these ideas.
And that, in fact, is really important in terms of publishing, because it did tell other publishers that there was an appetite there that was not being satisfied.
Well, exactly.
Once we were part of a bigger group, we lost our profitability. And of course, one of the things that Carmen always said is that you have to be profitable, which is something I believe in very much.
Now the party's over.
Chateau started to go bankrupt. If you didn't have your own paperback imprint, it was hopeless. That's how much publishing was changing.
I think it became obvious that the companies were quite badly run by the men who ran them. And then it became obvious that all the companies were losing money except for Virago. So that was a bit ironic.
If you look at the history of publishing, all publishing was just being, you know, munched up by bigger organizations.
We said we still want to buy ourselves out. And there was a big battle, which we won by saying we'd all leave. It was interesting.
There was this great deal of disaffection, and it was basically like, sod this, let's leave these men and let's go back out on our own. So we did the buyout. We all had to put some money in. It was something like £10,000 or something each.
Were you all in agreement this was the right thing to do?
We were. I mean, I didn't want to do it for my life, but I was in agreement that we should do it. I had Daniel, and it was the last thing I wanted in my life. And I knew that it was going to be all-consuming. And it was. And, you know, I had to write the business plan with Ursula, go to see the venture capitalists and the accountants and all the rest of it, you know, outside of ordinary working hours. I was brought up like that you know, you do not sacrifice your work. It was hard, and to be frank, in a different circumstance, I think I would have had another child, but, you know, I couldn't manage the balance.
Virago bought itself out, and I helped with that as well. And so they became an independent company again.
It was a very bonding time. We were all working very much together. It was great.
In the early days of feminism, women really wanted to be educated. So we could publish a lot of women's history. Everybody was really hungry to know who were these women before, who's got forgotten, what did they do, what were their names, all sorts of things. And that kind of went away slightly in the 90s. There was a feeling, I think, that it had been done, what's your problem? And there was all sorts of feelings that, feminism has gone too far, or, feminism's actually wrecked relationships between men and women.
There was a kind of a backlash, I think, about the gains of feminism.
Lad Mags came along. It was a very leering time. It was a hard time because you had to take all of this in a kind of cheery spirit. You had to sort of go, oh, ho, ho, loaded.
Feminism wasn't cool anymore, it wasn't radical. It had become quite academic and it was talking to itself quite a lot.
I just say that I'm one of the lads. Just carry on and I give as good as I get. I don't let them categorise me like that.
There was a younger generation of women who grew up thinking there were no barriers to their success, that their gender pulled them. And they could drink like the men and swear like the men and take their clothes off, and I think that had a profound effect on feminism.
There were so many of us who felt it's not over. The language is still sexist. Women are still not being paid the right amount of money.
I was working on a show called The Late Show on BBC Two, and we covered a shortlist for one of the Booker years. And to our astonishment, I think there were no women on the list that year. And in particular, there was not Angela Carter, who had published a book, I think it was Wise Children, that many of us have read and loved. And I think the sort of sense of, oh my God, how far have we not come, that this could still be true. It was, of course, a joke at the time. If size matters, we'll have a bigger prize pot than the Booker will.
A price-cutting war is looming in the book world after the Dillons chain of booksellers put many of its new titles on sale today at a 25% discount. Tonight, several publishers are taking out injunctions to stop Dillons discounting.
There was an industry wobble and books were harder to sell.
Dillon said their discounted books were selling at 5 times the normal rate.
There were more of them, and so you had to fight harder for your share in the market. The kind of girl power, ladette brand of feminism didn't sit very squarely with reading books, particularly.
The 90s was hard, and Virago struggled.
By the time we got to 95, we definitely were not going to be able to last all by ourselves.
I said that we're going to sell the company, and so we sold the company, and various people wanted to buy it.
The choice was between Bloomsbury and Little Brown. You know about that?
I've come across it. It must have been a very difficult decision for everyone to make.
Absolutely.
So we had this great, terrible moment when we all declared, but I didn't have a vote by then. I'd sold my shares.
Listen, one day I'll write a play about it.
The split went Ursula, Harriet and Alexandra, and Lenny and me.
Ursula and I both felt it should go to Bloomsbury.
And I had to choose, and I chose Little Brown.
I had a background in small publishing myself, and the smaller the cheese, the more ferocious the mice.
I was very, very against corporate publishing, and I felt it was wrong for Virago.
I wanted to get it to a company where Lenny could run it.
It was a bit of a mess.
After that meeting, I remember seeing Tim Waterstone, who was a non-exec on the Virago board, and he said, I've been on many boards, and I am on many boards, and I've never seen people behave as badly as you all did. And I looked at him and I said, but what you have to understand is we were family.
I understand that they did a television program some years ago in which they displayed infighting.
When I do. Frankly, darling, you're too fucking boring. They love the idea of a cat fight or things going wrong, and
probably a feeling that maybe women can't really do it. You know, everything else, all emotions get in the way and things like that.
The personal is the political. That's all we have to remember.
Big Women was a sort of parody.
Was it?
Yeah.
It's very forgettable, isn't it? I've forgotten it completely.
I don't know that that's that forgettable. Some dancing happens and you'll take your tops off.
Medusa. One look and she turns men's hearts to stone. Medusa!
I wouldn't have dreamt of exposing my breasts to anyone.
I'm sure.
In public.
We decided to throw a big party, and we made carrier bags saying, "You can't put a big woman down." And we just had a good time with it.
What they gained from the sale was financial security, greater marketing clout. And if you look at the remainder of the feminist publishing houses that were set up in the 70s, none of them were in business by that time. Virago remains the only kind of explicitly feminist publisher in the industry.
When we first came to Little Brown, there was a lot of conversation about how to sort of pep up Virago, how to kind of give it a new lease of life. We started a new list called Virago V. There was a sort of sense that we had to fly in the face of political correctness, being worthy, all those kinds of things. So Virago V's were supposed to be provocative.
Nobody else would have me, basically. Nobody else would publish it. But I have to say, I was absolutely delighted. It was a scent which, as a girl, I loved uncritically. Later, I heard it described by theatre managers and artistes as the smell of laughter, the very odour of applause. Later still, I came to know it as the essence not of pleasure, but of grief.
Sarah's not the first to introduce lesbian protagonists. Jeanette Winterson had obviously, among others, had done, her amazing book, Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit. And it was like lesbian, a bit like in the old sense, Queen Victoria's idea that it didn't really exist. It was kind of very off-center. And what someone like Sarah did is kind of, basically, she just makes lesbianism ordinary.
Virago V's, books with bite.
In the 90s, I think people did feel you couldn't have conversations always, of polemics certainly, and women's history, I felt you couldn't just do in the same way as you had in the early days of Virago. And memoir seemed to be a new way forward. And so I remember one of the books I'm extremely proud of publishing is called Desert Flower by Waris Deary. She's a model from Somalia who suddenly revealed to a women's magazine in America that she had suffered what was then called female circumcision, which is now called female genital mutilation. And nobody was talking about that.
Because it's got integrity, Virago is successful. If it started saying, oh, well, we can have a little sub-imprint that does boy meets girl romances, I think everyone would think that Virago is selling out and it would be much less successful. So there is absolutely no impetus from me or from anyone else for Virago to do anything other than stick to its guns.
I remember when we published Natasha Walter's book, Living Dolls, The Return of Sexism, which was picking up on some of this stuff that was feeling like, why isn't the world changed? Why do we still have still the problems? Why are girls still told that their bodies are their passport to success? We were just ready to be jumped upon, and we got one bad review. Everything else was just, yes, thankfully someone's talking about this. A lot of books suddenly sprang up. Caitlin Moran's How to Be a Woman, Laura Bates' Everyday Sexism. Suddenly the conversation was alive again, especially for young women.
The book is another way to talk about feminism. In it, everyone is talking about different versions, it's all personal stories, it's very accessible
I called myself a feminist, is picking up on the sort of the sense of young women now kind of arguing about feminism. Am I a feminist? Can I be this but not have that name? Or, you know, I do call myself a feminist. It's such an interesting conversation going on with young women under 30, I think.
I call myself a feminist with my body. So much of communication is non-verbal. We proclaim ourselves confident as we pound down the street with a straight back, unafraid to be visible. We try to hide our vulnerability when we're uncomfortable, when we hunch our way.
I feel more optimistic now than I have ever felt. Possibly back to sort of how I felt when I first found feminism in the end of the 70s. Because I feel these young women, they have a strong sense of themselves, it seems to me. They're also not frightened.
Growing up, I don't remember becoming a woman, but I do remember when I stopped being a girl. My memory is blurred from the Malibu, but I remember them holding me up because I couldn't stand. One under either arm and a few others in the background. One laughing, one keeping lookout. The smell of clean, fresh blood that I woke up to at 5 a.m. I started to drink till I blacked out, to make it all less difficult. By my 20s, I'd learned that alcohol is less difficult than family. Feminism always has been, and is still, the only place I feel that it's okay that I'm difficult.
Things go and come, they go and come. So first wave got the vote, second wave, end of 60s, out of the housewife mold. This wave, if you ask young women, it's about violence. Violence, rape, and death.
They're wonderful. Well, I'll see if I can get these posters into shape for the British Library. There's the most wonderful Elizabeth Taylor. Oh, Christine Stead, the most disagreeable of all the writers I ever published. Why have I got two of her? But she was a genius.
Tell me why you've decided to give your Virago collection to the British Library. Is this about putting everything to rest a little bit?
I don't think so. I'm not a very restful person. I just want people to know how it was. And also, of course, I've been ill. And once you're ill, you do all these things. Oh, she was wonderful, Storm Jameson. It was once I had lung cancer, I set about, I made a will. Stevie Smith, my favourite. I did a power of attorney so that they turn off the machine instantly. And I got my archive together and it's gone to the British Library.
Obviously, there are a lot more women being published these days. Do you feel that Virago still has a place?
I think Virago is now an august old lady. And she's still functioning extremely well with a lot of things to say. And why would you ever want to kill off an august old lady?
When I look back on it now and I think of the disputes we had and the stress there was, it's all very understandable because it was such a difficult thing to do. These are something I forgot. I'm so sorry, they were under the bed.
It was brilliant to get the final pieces of the Carmen Killel archive, have it all.
Do you feel it's an important part of our national heritage?
I think that's a bit boastful. I think it's part of women's history. And I think women's history is very, very important. More important than kings and queens. And so, yes, I suppose I do, really. But it's not just about me, it was a whole body of women all over the country. They achieved an enormous amount for the next generation.
Oh, that's very charming. I can't wait to see the apple. The apple on the spine. Yes.
We came out of a place where people were silenced. And that isn't quite true anymore in the same way.
How to do a balance sheet. Fixed assets are my loan, which depreciates. Bills for 1 month. Oh, The agony of it all.
I see the casing going by over there.
Feminism to me is incredibly simple. It's a humanitarian approach to the world, frankly.
To find another 10,000, I love this.
Yeah, Jason's advice, get more money.
My belief is that Virago was one of the most significant